Hey guys, and welcome back to another Lost Bits video right here on TetraBitGaming, the series where we take a look at the scrapped, unused, and unseen content in gaming. A few months ago, Banjo and Kazooie were both announced for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and I didn't really care. Not at all. Jokes aside, this was the duo that I wanted in Smash ever since the original on the N64, and I still can't believe they actually made it in. Nintendo also just dropped Banjo and Kazooie seemingly out of the blue during the last Direct, so time to stop putting off making this video. That's right, finally in this video we'll be taking a look at one of my all-time favorite games, and one that many of you have been asking for a very, very long time, the N64 classic Banjo Kazooie. So sit back, through some cut content we are about to blitz, it's time to find some cool lost bits. Now, I'm sure many of you might be familiar with the pre-release history of Banjo Kazooie, but I still think it's pretty important, so we'll quickly go through it and touch on some of the things from the earlier builds that never made it into the final release. So initially, Banjo Kazooie was titled Project Dream, and later Dream Land of Giants. And instead of a bear and bird duo, it featured a young lad named Edison. Dream began development shortly after the release of Donkey Kong Country, and it too was also being made for the Super Nintendo, which explains its visual similarities to Donkey Kong Country. Apparently this game did have Banjo in it, but only as a side character. Eventually, development of Dream then shifted to the Nintendo 64 to make use of the new, more powerful hardware. Although the setting of this version looks similar, it does look less polished than what was made for the SNES. I assume at this point, the developers were still learning how to develop on the N64. Both of these versions of Dream obviously look way different than the final release of BK, and much of it, including the protagonist Edison, were completely scrapped. Then one fateful day, the developers at Rare made the switch from Edison to a bipedal bear and trusty Breagle duo many would grow to love, Banjo and Kazooie. The game now also shifted to a sort of side-scrolling 3D game more akin to Donkey Kong Country. Although the Jinjos, the Bull, and Oranges made their way into the final release, in this build other things were scrapped, like collecting cherries, strawberries, this helmet enemy, and this thick snail. Although not explicitly seen in this build, apparently Banjo was also at one point designed to be a skater.
It wasn't that great an idea.
Only remnants of this can still be seen in this build, as Banjo has a skateboarding animation that looks like he's pulling off some sort of nose grab. Most of the animations at this point in development weren't super polished, and yeah, floating motionless oranges are kinda weird. Then another development shift later on now set up the game to be a full 3D platformer. In this footage of this build, we can see some early grass textures, an unused animation of Banjo getting jiggy with it, an unused Jiggy sprite, an earlier version of Spiral Mountain which has Conga and the Bull, suggesting that maybe Spiral Mountain was planned to be a full stage at some point, and an early version of Mumbo's Mountain with different textures, different looking area with Congo, a scrapped masked enemy, and a way less memorable looking Mumbo's hut. The inside of the hut and Mumbo himself also look pretty different here. Treasure Trove Cove also saw a few changes, but the biggest ones appear to be in Clanker's Cavern, which looks completely different with a very basic looking Clanker. And then there's Bubble Gloop Swamp, which also looks pretty different and appears to be in an unfinished state in this build. Lastly, at this point in development, there was also a temple test map that, until this footage was released, was only seen in other early development screenshots and footage, and was a big mystery for the longest time. The developers did reveal that this was unfortunately just a test area and probably wasn't intended to be a full level. Only footage of this early build exists from the Rare revealed developer videos, but I really hope one day a playable version of this or the earlier builds gets leaked. I would absolutely love to play around in these areas myself. Other major things that were cut or significantly altered for release include the area of the intro cutscene, a picture of Donkey Kong near Banjo's bed, Banjo's room overall, these early versions of the Grublins that apparently wore knockoff Mumbo masks, a better but still different looking version of Mumbo's hut that looks like Red Skull, and finally, an early, more basic looking model of Bottles the Mole. Alright, now with the pre-release stuff that didn't make it into the final release done with, time to move on to the final version of the game many of us fell in love with. Let's kick things off with some unused music. Starting off with some more familiar sounding tunes, there are two early versions of the Click Clock Wood theme, a summer variant and an autumn one. Let's have a quick listen to both. Next is an unused Mumbo's Rain Dance tune. I gotta say, this one is an absolute bop. A very similar song can be heard in Banjo Tooie during Mumbo's spells, so it's theorized that maybe the Mumbo spells were also planned to appear in this game as well. Next is an early version of the Treasure Trove Cove music, back when the stage was still known as Hammerhead Beach. Apparently, the game's legendary composer Grant Kirkhope didn't think it fit the style of the stage and decided it should be reworked. Lastly is an unused song known simply as Advent, and this song has been a Banjo Kazooie mystery for many years. To this day, it is still unknown exactly what or where this tune was meant for, but its internal name might suggest that it could have been an early theme for Freezeezy Peak, or whatever level was there at an earlier point in development. Banjo Kazooie has a fantastic feature that changes the style of background music when the player enters a different type of area like a cave or inside a giant shell. There are actually a few underwater variations like this that go unused. One from Freezeezy Peak, and one from the engine room in Rusty Bucket Bay. For the latter, there isn't any swimmable water in the engine room, but according to Greg Mayles, the game's lead designer, he tweeted that originally the engine room was planned to be flooded, so this track may be a remnant from that scrapped design choice. On the shorter side, there are also 3 more unused audio tracks. The first one is known as Door Open. This track was actually reused in Banjo Tooie when Dingpot replenishes your items. Next is Quit. Based on the name and how it sounds, it appears to be a shorter version of the game over music when quitting the game, and this was probably used before the long game over cutscene was implemented. And lastly is a track titled Mystery. The name definitely suits the nature of this song, as it can only be heard in the game by collecting an also unused random honeycomb variant. Now it may look the same as a normal random honeycomb, but upon collecting it, the mystery jingle will play, and Banjo and Kazooie's health bar honeycombs will begin blinking, and after some time, whichever honeycomb is lit up is how much health will remain. If this sounds familiar, this is similar to how the exclamation mark honeycombs work in Banjo Tooie, only those you stop with the A button, making it a lot less random. Moving along, we have some unused gameplay demos. Yeah, the ones that appear on the title screen. These still exist in the game and can even be loaded in with a GameShark code. There's an unused demo for Spiral Mountain, one for the inside of Grunty's lair, one for Freezeezy Peak, and finally a very short one in the captain's cabin in Rusty Bucket Bay. Banjo Kazooie also has some text strings that go unused. The first of these is a test text for the quiz section towards the end of the game, which reads, "This is a slightly longer piece of text for the quiz dialogue." Seems pretty straightforward. Then there are two unused early versions of Grunty's messages. The first is for when the player jumps into the water in Rusty Bucket Bay. She was originally planned to say, "My oily scum will make you gasp and choke when you're in Grunty's grasp." This was then changed to, "My oily water, in you plunge, you'll lose air while in that gunge." I guess talking about her oily scum seemed a bit too risque. The other unused message was for when Banjo swims under some icy water in the winter part of Click Clock Wood. She originally would have said, "You'll use your air up double fold, I've made the water ice cold." And this was eventually changed to, "Yes, that's right, swim under there, icy water takes double air." Yeah, I'll be taking that award for the best Grunty impression, thank you. This last one was presumably changed since it's the player controlling the seasonal cycle that makes the water turn ice cold, not Grunty. The last notable unused text string is one that reads, "Exit to Witch's Lair," and this one has a bit of history to it. This is actually another feature that was scrapped from the game, the ability to exit back to Grunty's lair without having to waltz back to the teleporter pad at the beginning of a stage. A screenshot containing this option in the pause menu is actually present in some copies of the North American instruction booklet, so it's believed that it might have been removed pretty late in the game's development. Even more interestingly, the feature is still left over in the game, and can even be loaded in using a GameShark code. It's a shame this was removed because it sure beats having to run all the way back to the start. Before we continue, I just want to quickly touch on this game's stop and swap feature. I'll keep it pretty short here as I do plan on making a dedicated video covering it in more detail sometime in the future. So basically, the stop and swap feature is one that was scrapped in Banjo Kazooie but can still be accessed in almost its entirety. After completing the game and seeing some hints from Mumbo, the player can input certain cheat codes inside the sandcastle in Treasure Trove Cove to spawn in several differently colored eggs around the game, as well as the previously shown ice key. These were all intended to have some sort of functionality with Banjo Tooie and would require the player swapping between the carts in order to transfer the data. Unfortunately, newer N64 models required this swap to be done within about a second, making it pretty tough to do properly, not to mention I'm sure would have caused lots of damage to both the carts and N64 consoles. Because of this, the whole feature was scrapped, and it became a famous Banjo Kazooie legend. The feature was later re-implemented in the Xbox Live Arcade ports of both the Banjo games, and after getting all the eggs and the ice key, it would net the player certain rewards like rare parts in Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Up next, my favorite part, some unused and normally inaccessible areas. You guys know I love me some test rooms, and thankfully Banjo Kazooie comes through with one left over in the game as well. It's pretty small and basically just consists of several ramps, each at a different angle. This area was very likely used to test how Banjo, as well as Kazooie using the Talon-Trot move, would fare against different slope angles. This test map was also loaded into Mumbo's Mountain, so here we can also see some ticker termite enemies, flowers, as well as notes left over. Admittedly, it's not the most interesting test room I've come across on this series, and it really reminds me of the one from DK64, but hey, any test room is a good test room in my books. What could possibly follow up after a test room, you might be wondering? Well, I was actually able to play around with some cheat codes and load into several cutscenes in the game as a playable level. Most of these areas are completely inaccessible, so let's see what we can find. Let's start off at the beginning, all the way back, even before the title screen. Here we can trot amongst the walking Nintendo logo and see how it walks off screen, and then collapses and flies away for some reason. And we can also get a behind the scenes look at the Buzz Bomb flying into the Rare logo. We can also see the back of the Rare logo, something I don't think is otherwise ever visible. Additionally, there's also a lone yellow Jinjo found off in the distance that disappears as soon as the Rare logo pops up into focus of the cutscene. No idea why the Jinjo would be here as it never appears in this intro cutscene. Next, let's move on to the intro theme. Here we spawn in beside an absolutely massive Banjo model doing something before the main intro plays out. The first part of this is chaos. There's just so much happening with all the characters moving and the bulls running around. It's just crazy. And here once again we can see a yellow Jinjo off in the distance. Weird. This is actually crazy though. I still can't believe I'm able to play around in the intro cutscene like this. Next up, we can visit Grunty's lair and see her at her cauldron, and then watch her walk away into the next area where only her hands remain. This is clearly from that one cutscene at the start of the game, but I just find it funny to see her floating arms as well as this tiny little cauldron. I think it's very cool that they were able to pull off such a convincing cutscene using this trick. In this same area, we can also witness the game over sequence where Gruntilda and Tooty swap their beauty level. This is another cutscene that's really cool to see play out in real time, but from a different perspective. Also, I gotta admit, and I hope I'm not the only one, but this cutscene really creeped me out when I was younger. Next up, we can also visit Banjo's house. It seems almost weird to be playing as Banjo, but also seeing him sleeping. It's like I'm controlling his ghost or something. At first I thought this cutscene wouldn't have much to see, but then some paranormal activity began to occur. Yeah, okay. And the last notable cutscene to discuss is the end cutscene at the beach, commonly referred to as Hammerhead Beach after the scrapped Treasure Trove Cove name. Anyways, here we again spawn in with the characters that normally appear in the scene, and they all appear to be a little bit bigger. The cutscene again plays out in real time, and we can get a closer look at all the characters and follow this lady here to see where she goes. Oh, okay. There she is. Guess I'm not the only one who fancies moon jumping around here. She can also be seen asserting her dominance off screen with her fruit tray before teleporting to the other side. Seeing all these cutscenes from different perspectives was awesome, not to mention being able to play around in them as if they were a normal level. Definitely one of my favorite things I've come across on this show. And last but not least, we got some leftover unused graphics. There are sprites for a small animated Christmas tree from Freeze Easy Peak, a dialogue animation for what appears to be a coconut, an unused tree sprite, some unused 2D button icons likely meant to be seen in dialogue boxes, a small firefly sprite, some early sprites of the empty honeycombs and hourglasses, and then there's an unused and unseen mouth part of the texture used for the eyes of the lockup enemies. I guess this part goes unused because the whole treasure chest opening is its mouth. Then, as far as unused models go, there's an on vacation sign that is believed to have been intended for Mumbo's hut in the winter cycle of Click Clock Wood, a green flag with a BK logo on it, a picture of several enemies probably meant to be seen in Mad Monster Mansion, some vents that would have been a stage hazard, and finally, and I think most interesting, are some unused debugging models. These include things like early music notes, a camera, and the word kill. Now, I haven't heard of any debug mode that's accessible in this game, but hopefully one day one is discovered, as I'd really love to see these in action. But anyways guys, that will be it for this Lost Bits video, and I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you did, be sure to slap a like down below, it really helps me out a lot. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more Lost Bits like it, you can do so by clicking on the card right here. And if you want to stay even more up to date with the channel, be sure to subscribe here and swing by my Twitter and other social media things, all of which will be linked in the description below. If you would like to support the channel even more, check out my merch at TetraBitGaming.com and consider becoming a channel member by clicking the big join button below the video. But as always guys, thank you all so much for tuning in, and I will see you in a bit.